None of the billions that were being offered were going to the WTA. Companies weren't just chasing Alex Eala. They were skipping the whole tour. A 19-year-old Filipino had surpassed a professional circuit built over 50 years in terms of financial utility. The tennis world didn't just raise eyebrows when the financial numbers began to surface. Instead, it held its breath because what was happening wasn't a sponsoring tale but rather a power shift, a modest corporate revolution disguised in a tennis skirt, and the WTA didn't notice it coming. Stay locked in because, in the end, you'll understand why the most important struggle in women's tennis right now isn't happening on any court. A particular kind of athlete transcends its sport before it appropriately recognizes them. It was Muhammad Ali. It was Serena Williams. And now, Alex Eala is doing it on a scale that includes business boardrooms from Manila to Manhattan, completely reworking their marketing strategy, whether or not the WTA institution approves. Eala brought something to professional tennis that no coaching manual teaches. She was born in the Philippines, brought up under strict discipline, and trained at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca. Her story resonated with billions of people in Southeast Asia, Europe, and the Americas at the same time. It was a true cross-continental, multi-generational story. What marketing executives covertly refer to as a great cultural convergence was produced by this combination: the underdog location, the elite European training ground, and the contagious personality. Long before the rankings caught up, businesses took note. Eala's social media following had surpassed that of many players with higher rankings by the time she was making waves on the WTA tour. She had higher than average Instagram interaction rates for a tennis player. They were powerful enough for any athlete, anywhere in the world, in any sport. Companies are gauging genuine audience engagement by real emotional commitment from authentic communities rather than just follower counts. We are looking at statistics that prompted their analysts to verify the information twice. Sports companies, high-end watch manufacturers, tech giants, and telecom companies with sizable Southeast Asian customer bases. They were actively competing rather than just being interested. Discussions were progressing from exploratory discussions to significant financial pledges behind closed doors. Notably, these conversations were not taking place via WTA partnering channels. They were heading straight for Eala's attorney. This distinction is quite significant. The WTA operates using a traditional sports marketing framework. Income models built around the community, official tour alliances, and centralized sponsorships. Although it was designed for a different era, the model worked well for decades. Before, a single athlete can attract more online interest than the entire company's promotion of her. Eala stood for everything that the previous model had failed to take into consideration. A player whose unique brand gravity was completely removing sponsors from the tour's orbit. Just by appearing and engaging with people on a frequency that WTA's institutional voice was unable to match, not by disagreement or conflict. There were more and more murmurs in tennis circles. Brand partners began informing agents representing other players that budget allocations were being examined. Rejuvenation recommendations started to get more subdued responses from tournament sponsors. Women's tennis wasn't losing money. It was concentrating on a single, distinct point of cultural gravity. There was a name for that point. There was a backhand to that point that might disrupt conversations. And that was only the beginning. Pose this question to yourself. When was the last time a teenager forced billion-dollar companies to completely reconsider their approach to sports marketing? Because it was already there at that point. There is a technique for numbers to get out of rooms. They were never meant to leave. The figures pertaining to Alex Eala's individual sponsorship portfolio that were being discussed in private conversations weren't minor endorsement agreements. Professional tennis players outside of the top 10 typically get mid-tier settings like this. A player who is still rising in the rankings, was placed in commercial negotiations typically reserved for veteran Grand Slam champions due to a type of financial commitment that was revealed in secret term sheets in preliminary agreements. According to reports from the sports industry, each brand delivers comparable figures that, when combined throughout numerous partnerships, created a total portfolio value estimated in billions rather than millions when projected over multi-year commitments. According to reports, One of the top contenders was a telecom giant with significant market penetration in Southeast Asia. Numerous sportswear companies entered crucial discussions by interpreting the cultural imprint AIA controlled throughout a sizable and growing customer population. She was considered indispensable by tech companies looking for genuine ambassador voices in emerging areas. These offers were unique not just because of their size but also because of their structure. Brands weren't contacting AIA's management to see about how she fit into the current frameworks for WTA neighboring partnerships. They were building entirely custom setups, creative collaborations, ownership stakes, sponsored content initiatives, and long-term ambassador infrastructures that viewed her as more than just an athletic endorser. In an interview with industry publications, a sports marketing analyst characterized the situation with startling candor. Brands had made the fundamental decision that going around the tour rather than through it was a more effective way to access the emotional connection AIA created with the audience. Although useful for reaching big tennis audiences, the WTA's official partnership infrastructure was unable to provide the precise, intensely devoted, culturally unique groups that personally followed AIA. This information had serious financial ramifications for the WTA. The collective loses power when businesses shift sponsorship funds from organizational alliances to individual A. That's business. However, the WTA penalties were the same for all purposes. Tour execs were having heated conversations behind closed doors. When one of its own members is now a more desirable individual investment than the group platform, how can an organization maintain sponsorship significance? In order to accommodate an athlete whose personal audience outweighs institutional reach, how might commercial frameworks designed for a pre-social media context be reorganized? These were no longer speculative strategic inquiries. They needed answers very away. And the WTA seems to be looking for the answers far too slowly for reasons that will eventually become very public. Whether AIA deserved these offers wasn't the big question. No one really questioned that. Much more unsettling was the question that was tearing through tennis boardrooms. Had the commercial story already been lost by the WTA? If so, would they ever be able to get it back? When there is a systemic catastrophe, silence is never really quiet. Everything is communicated and indicated. The WTA's official communication channels were noticeably quiet as brand discussions surrounding Alex Eala were getting more intense and sports business media was starting to make official connections. There was only institutional inaction at the exact moment when bold action was most needed. No formal acknowledgement, no strategic positioning statement, and no clear attempt to reframe the commercial conversation on their terms. And it was horrible to be silent. In today's media landscape, an organization's failure to control its own narrative creates more than just a void. It gives everyone else the microphone. Fan communities across continents, rival sports organizations, tennis writers, and sports marketing analysts all scrambled to fill the interpretive gap left by the WTA. The story being told without them was unflattering. It showed a governing body caught completely off guard by a change that, looking back, had been observed for years. This delayed reaction had complex underlying structural factors. Working across multiple jurisdictions, the WTA concurrently balances conflicting interests from players, competitions, broadcasters, and well-known business partners. Under normal circumstances, decision-making within that framework proceeds deliberately because deliberateness exhibits responsibility governance. However, the circumstances surrounding AIA's commercial boom were anything but typical. Speed was necessary, adaptation was crucial, and speed wasn't coming. Meanwhile, individual sponsors, growing wary of the WTA's strategic orientation, started probing talks that months earlier would have been unthinkable. Brands that had maintained stable, mutually beneficial tour partnerships after years were suddenly asking basic questions about return on investment. Were WTA-adjacent positions still reaching the audiences brands needed most? Or had those viewers moved away from institutional channels entirely in pursuit of particular athletes, singular experiences, or distinct cultural moments? Tour leadership was really unhappy with the internal responses those brands were getting. Digital analytics are not negotiable. The overwhelming conclusion of numerous independent commercial assessments was consistent, and audience movement data does not respect historical linkages. The WTA's ability to reach some valuable audience groups has significantly declined. Players throughout the circuit began to notice the downstream effects even though Eala's various platforms had concurrently today. Discussions with potential personal sponsors were poignant. WTA alliance alignment was no longer mentioned as a positive indication by brand representatives, or they were framing it with qualifications that had never been used before. The institutional support that previously increased the commercial value of individual players was beginning to lose some of its allure. Speaking anonymously to sports media, seasoned athletes conveyed sincere annoyance. They had dedicated their lives to enhancing the WTA's overall business standing. Many saw institutional quiet at a critical juncture as a serious leadership failure that may destroy years of teamwork. Officially, nothing has changed. The WTA's lack of communication wasn't just a PR blunder. It served as a warning to all of the corporate partners who are presently assessing their involvement with women's tennis that the organization lacked the awareness or the resolve to manage its own change. That signal held significant weight for sponsors used to working with forward-thinking, strategically articulate firms. There was a genuine cost associated with each day of institutional stillness, and the bill was mounting quickly. Corporations never use the word withdrawal when they start discreetly reorganizing their financial obligations. It's always softer. Changing investment priorities, portfolio reevaluation, and strategic reallocation. However, the meaning remains the same beneath the meticulous corporate jargon. The funds are flowing. Additionally, it began to move with frightening speed in women's tennis. The departures didn't make a big announcement. Institutional sponsorship erosion never works like that. It occurs as a result of unresolved renewal discussions, option clauses that expire without being activated, and partnership agreements that are merely not renewed with the zeal or at the amounts of money they were demanded. The commercial foundation started to reveal fractures gradually, and then, all of a sudden, a number of well-known WTA businesses started shifting significant amounts of their sports marketing funds to individual athlete collaborations outside of tour arrangements. From a purely commercial standpoint, the reasoning behind these choices was simple and completely logical. Tour-eyed placement data was consistently exceeded by audience engagement measures surrounding individual players, with EALA being the most striking example, albeit not the only one. The result was straightforward for firms maximizing every marketing expenditure against quantifiable audience response. This was instantly felt by the tournament environment. Tighter financial limits were imposed on smaller WTA2